Before we begin, let me tell you what this is and what it isn't. This is not entertainment. This is not a countdown of famous monsters, and you won't find speculation about what might exist in shadows today. What you're about to hear is something stranger and more unsettling. The documented history of creatures that entire civilizations believed were real. Creatures that shaped how people lived and died. Creatures that have now been completely forgotten. We're going to trace these forgotten terrors across 4,000 years. From the ziggurats of ancient Mesopotamia, through the plague-haunted villages of medieval Europe, past the gaslit streets of Victorian London, to creatures that vanished within living memory in the American wilderness. 20 creatures, all once genuinely believed to exist, all now erased from collective memory. For each one, I'll tell you what they were, why people believed in them, how they shaped daily life, and most importantly, why they vanished. What cultural earthquakes erased them from memory? What replaced them? And what invisible traces do they leave in how we think today? Every detail you'll hear is documented. Ancient clay tablets, medieval legal records, Victorian newspapers, 20th century folklore collections. These creatures lived in written records even after they died in belief. I've traced them through dusty archives and museum collections, through the last testimonies of people who actually believed, through the precise moment when each one flickered out of existence. If you want deeply researched content that treats folklore not as entertainment, but as cultural archaeology, that examines the evolution of human fear itself through creatures we've collectively forgotten, then settle in. This is comprehensive. This will take time. And if you value this approach, I ask only that you consider subscribing. Because what we're studying isn't really monsters, it's ourselves. Every creature humanity creates reveals what that culture fears, how they understand the world, what explanations satisfy them. And watching creatures die reveals something even more profound: how knowledge systems change, how certainties crumble, how what seemed obvious to millions becomes incomprehensible to their grandchildren. We begin in ancient Mesopotamia in what is now Iraq, nearly 4,000 years ago. We begin with a creature whose name you've never heard, whose terror shaped the first civilizations, whose archetype echoes through every demon that followed. We begin with the dead who refused to stay dead. Chapter 1: Ancient World Horrors We Erased. The Gidim, Mesopotamia's vengeful dead. In ancient Mesopotamia, death was not an ending. It was a transition requiring precise execution. Bury the body incorrectly. Fail to perform the right rituals. Let murder go unavenged. Forget to bring offerings to the grave. And the dead would return, not as corpses shambling from tombs, but as something more insidious. The Gidim, spirits of the improperly dead, angry and hungry, and impossible to escape. The Sumerians called them Gidim. The Akkadians called them Etemu. But the terror they represented was identical. Your own dead, transformed by neglect or violence into something that would destroy you. We know this because they wrote it down. Thousands of clay tablets preserve their fears in wedge-shaped cuneiform pressed into clay that somehow survived 40 centuries. The Epic of Gilgamesh describes them. Ritual texts detail elaborate ceremonies to keep them satisfied. Medical documents diagnose their attacks. One tablet in the British Museum's Assyrian collection, carved during the Neo-Assyrian Empire, calls the Gidim the ghost that has nobody, whose name is not named, the spirit that wanders in the streets seizing whoever passes. And they did seize people. A person gripped by nightmares every night, wasting away despite eating, suddenly paralyzed in the middle of ordinary tasks, consumed by unexplained pain, sinking into what we might call depression. This was the Gidim's work. But these weren't internal conditions to Mesopotamian thinking. The spirit literally entered the body, wrapped around its victim like a burial shroud, slowly draining life force itself. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the hero's companion Enkidu has a nightmare. Seized by a creature with a lion's head and an eagle's talons, an overwhelming supernatural strength that drags him toward the underworld. He wakes terrified, describes what attacked him, and scholars recognize this immediately. It's a Gidim attack, preserved in humanity's oldest written story. But here's what's crucial to understand. The Mesopotamians distinguished between ordinary dead and Gidim. The properly buried dead dwelt peacefully in the underworld, eating dust, neither happy nor malevolent, just existing in the realm reserved for them. The Gidim were anomalies, failures of the death system, spirits trapped between worlds because the rituals failed. This meant death itself was a technical process with specific requirements. You needed proper burial in the family tomb, continuous offerings of food and water brought by descendants, and if you died violently, your death had to be avenged. These weren't superstitions, they were essential maintenance of cosmic order. Skip them, and you created a Gidim. Create a Gidim, and it would destroy everyone you loved. So Mesopotamian life centered on keeping the dead satisfied. Families brought offerings to tombs regularly. Bread, beer, dates, water, setting them before the grave and reciting the names of the dead. Forget someone's name, fail to bring offerings, and that ancestor became Gidim. Murder demanded blood vengeance, not from hatred but from obligation. Leave a murder unavenged and the victim's spirit became Gidim, attacking the very family that failed to avenge them. The Babylonian Talmud, compiled 2,000 years after Gilgamesh, but preserving much older Mesopotamian traditions, describes protective rituals still in use, drawing a circle of salt around yourself, wearing specific amulets inscribed with divine names, reciting formulas that commanded the Gidim to leave. These practices originated in ancient Mesopotamia and somehow persisted for millennia, passed down through cultural memory even after the civilization that created them had vanished. Then something changed. Several forces converged to kill the Gidim. First came new religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam. All emphasized individual judgment and afterlife, based on faith and behavior, not offerings and burial rituals. The dead went to heaven or hell or paradise based on how they lived and what they believed. They didn't linger as spirits capable of attacking the living, and they certainly didn't need food offerings at graves. This theology had no room for the Gidim. The creature contradicted the entire framework. Second, Mesopotamian culture itself died. When Akkadians ceased being spoken, when cuneiform writing was forgotten, when the last priests of the old gods died without successors, the entire system supporting the Gidim collapsed. By the time Christianity dominated the region, no one remained who understood the old theology, who performed the rituals, who knew how to keep the dead satisfied. Third, medical knowledge advanced. Greek physicians introduced humoral theory. Illness resulted from imbalances of bodily fluids, not spirit attacks. Later, germ theory provided actual causes for the wasting diseases and paralysis attributed to Gidim. The symptoms remained, but the explanation changed. And once the explanation changed, the creature became unnecessary. But the Gidim didn't completely disappear. Its archetype persisted, the idea of angry dead, of improperly buried corpses returning to torment the living, of spirits seeking vengeance. The Romans had their lemures, medieval Europe had revenants, Victorian ghost stories centered on the unavenged dead. Modern horror movies still feature spirits who can't rest until their murder is solved or their body is properly buried. We still understand, somewhere deep in cultural memory, that the dead have claims on the living. We still feel the unease of forgotten graves and unavenged wrongs. The Gidim died, but it left children everywhere. The last documented reference to Gidim-like spirits in Mesopotamia appears in Mandean texts, a Gnostic religious community in southern Iraq that preserved fragments of pre-Islamic traditions. By the 7th century, when Islamic conquest transformed the region, even these references fade. The Giddim, which had terrorized Mesopotamia for 3,000 years, was forgotten within a generation of its cultural framework collapsing. And with it vanished an entire theory of death, a sophisticated understanding that recognized different types of death, different dangers, different obligations. We gained accurate medical diagnosis, but we lost the elaborate ritual systems that helped communities process grief, manage obligations to the dead, and make sense of why some deaths felt more wrong than others. The Lamashtu, Mesopotamia's child killer. But Mesopotamia had another demon, and this one was worse, because the Lamashtu killed infants. She was not a spirit of the dead, but a demon in her own right, daughter of the sky god Anu, and she was hungry. Specifically, she craved pregnant women and newborn children. Hundreds of amulets bearing her image survive today, scattered across museum collections. The British Museum houses several hundred. The Louvre has a famous bronze plaque showing her in detail. These weren't art, they were protection, worn by terrified mothers who knew that in ancient Mesopotamia, your child had perhaps a 30 to 40% chance of dying before age 5. And the Lamashtu, they believed, was responsible for many of those deaths. The image was always the same: a demon with a lion's head, donkey's teeth and ears, long clawed fingers, bare breasts, standing or kneeling on a donkey. Often she holds snakes. Often she nurses dogs or pigs at her breasts. Every element was symbolic. The lion head represented predatory ferocity. The donkey features connected her to chaos beyond civilization. The nursing of animals perverted motherhood. She was everything a mother should not be, given horrifying form. And what did she do? Ancient texts describe it in their own words. She crept into houses at night and approached cradles. She laid her hand on a pregnant woman's stomach 7 times. She touched a nursing infant, and the infant sickened and died. The pregnant woman miscarried. The newborn failed to thrive. One old Babylonian incantation carved into a clay tablet now in Berlin describes her. Lamashtu, daughter of Anu, whose hand is a net, whose grasp is death, who touches the bellies of women in labor, who pulls out the pregnant woman's baby, who seizes the child at the wet nurse's breast. Another text, part of what scholars call the Lamashtu series, preserves what was believed to be her own boast. I go out like a god, I enter like a serpent, I come in like the wind, I lay my hand on the baby 7 times. The symptoms attributed to Lamashtu were what we now recognize as the ancient world's catastrophic infant mortality. Babies who stopped nursing, who developed fevers, who simply died mysteriously in the night. This was SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome, but they had no name for it except Lamashtu. Pregnant women who miscarried, who died in childbirth, who developed infections after delivery. Lamashtu had attacked them, and mothers were terrified. Every pregnant woman in Mesopotamia wore Lamashtu amulets. Every birth involved elaborate rituals. Every cradle had protective figurines hung above it, often images of Pazuzu, another demon but one who paradoxically protected against Lamashtu. Families performed rituals involving substitute dolls, trying to trick Lamashtu into attacking the doll instead of the real infant. One particularly elaborate ritual describes creating a clay figurine of Lamashtu, placing offerings before it, reciting incantations commanding her to leave, then ritually destroying the figurine and burying the pieces at the city gate, symbolically expelling her from the community. The sophistication of these rituals is remarkable. They weren't simple superstitions thrown together in panic. They represented centuries of development, refinement through generations of desperate parents trying anything that might save their children. This was systematic magical practice built on one foundation: the unbearable reality that babies died constantly and no one could prevent it. The Lamashtu persisted for 3,000 years. Long after other Mesopotamian demons faded, mothers still feared her. She appears in Babylonian texts, Assyrian incantations, later Jewish folklore where she merges with Lilith, Arabic traditions as Al-Qarana. The demon crossed cultures and religions because the tragedy she explained was universal. But eventually, slowly, she began to fade. Several things happened. Like the Giddim, when Mesopotamian religion collapsed, the theological framework supporting Lamashtu crumbled. New religions had no place for Anu's demon daughter. Christianity, Judaism, Islam all explained infant death differently. Not demon attacks, but God's will, test of faith, or natural causes in a fallen world. Lamashtu couldn't survive this conceptual shift. But more importantly, and this is crucial, Lamashtu didn't truly disappear until infant mortality actually declined. Greek and Roman physicians described natural causes of infant death, yes. Medieval doctors theorized about it. But babies kept dying at catastrophic rates. And as long as infants kept dying mysteriously, supernatural explanations remained psychologically necessary. Only when 19th and 20th century advances in hygiene, nutrition and medicine actually lowered infant mortality to tolerable levels could Lamashtu finally die. When babies stopped dying so frequently and mysteriously, the demon who killed them was no longer needed. The last cultures to maintain Lamashtu-like beliefs were those that industrialized latest. In rural parts of the Middle East, belief in child-killing demons persisted into the early 20th century. But by mid-century, with antibiotics and vaccination and improved obstetric care dramatically reducing infant deaths, these demons finally vanished. With Lamashtu went something we might not want back, but should understand we lost. An elaborate psychological framework for processing unbearable grief. When your baby died in ancient Mesopotamia, you had explanation, causation, prevention to try for the next child, rituals to perform, community support through shared belief. The explanation was wrong, but it provided tools for surviving devastation. Modern parents whose children die to SIDS receive medical explanation, respiratory failure. But this answers only mechanism. It doesn't answer why this baby, why now, why us, what did we do wrong? We have grief counseling and support groups, yes, but these are new, still being refined. The Mesopotamians had 3,000 years to develop their system. We gained truth. We lost the comfort that came with false certainty. That's not a bad trade. Truth prevented millions of infant deaths, but we should recognize what vanished along with the lie. The Akkazu, Mesopotamia's disease demon. Mesopotamia had a third category of creature, and this one embodied disease itself, the Akkazu, whose name meant simply, the Caesar. And that's exactly what she did. She seized people with illness. The Akkazu dwelt in mountains and deserts, in the chaotic spaces beyond civilization. She had no fixed form, sometimes appearing as a hideous woman, sometimes as a storm cloud, sometimes remaining completely invisible. This shapelessness made her more terrifying because you couldn't recognize her until she'd already attacked. A Neo-Assyrian medical text describes diseases attributed to the Akkazu. If a man's body is full of heat, if he has fever, if his breathing is labored, if he coughs blood, if his limbs are weak, the hand of Akkazu is upon him. We recognize this now as tuberculosis, pneumonia, various respiratory diseases, but Mesopotamians saw not microbes, but demons. The Akkazu had laid her hand on the victim, was draining their life force, needed to be expelled through both medicine and magic. The treatments reveal how they thought about disease causation. One prescription includes herbal remedies to reduce fever and strengthen the body. alongside ritual fumigation with specific plants, recitation of incantations, wearing protective amulets, and offerings to healing gods. This wasn't contradictory thinking. The demon caused the disease, yes, but physical remedies could strengthen the body to resist, while magical actions drove the demon away. Both were necessary. Neither alone was sufficient. The Mesopotamians had multiple disease demons: the Utuku, the Alu, the Galu, different classifications based on symptoms, circumstances of attack, appropriate treatments. This was a systematic attempt to categorize and understand disease. The categories were supernatural, but the method was fundamentally scientific. Observe symptoms, classify by type, apply appropriate treatment. The Akazu persisted until humanity discovered what actually causes disease. This took millennia. Ancient explanations for disease fell broadly into two categories: imbalance theories like Greek humoral medicine, and entity theories like Mesopotamian demons. For 2,000 years, these competed and coexisted. A patient might believe simultaneously in humoral imbalance and demonic attack. The theories weren't mutually exclusive. Everything changed when microscopes revealed actual disease causes. Antony van Leeuwenhoek observed microorganisms in 1676. Louis Pasteur demonstrated germ theory in the 1860s. Robert Koch identified specific bacteria causing specific diseases in the 1880s. But the killing blow wasn't just discovering germs exist. It was proving that killing germs cures disease. When Joseph Lister's antiseptic techniques reduced surgical infections dramatically, when sanitation improvements in cities reduced epidemics visibly, when antibiotics cured previously fatal illnesses reliably, the evidence became overwhelming. Disease had material causes and material cures. Demons weren't necessary. The Akazu's last stronghold was in rural areas without modern medicine. As long as disease remained mysterious and untreatable, supernatural explanations retained utility. But by mid-20th century, even remote villages had access to antibiotics and vaccines. The Akazu, having terrorized Mesopotamia for 3,000 years, vanished within a single generation once effective medicine became available. The Apep, Egypt's serpent of chaos. We cross now from Mesopotamia to Egypt for a creature of different scale entirely. The Apep didn't attack individuals, it threatened reality itself. Apep, also called Apophis, was the great serpent of chaos who sought to devour the sun god Ra each night. Unlike Mesopotamian demons targeting humans, Apep's battle was cosmic. Every single night, as Ra journeyed through the underworld from sunset in the west to sunrise in the east, Apep attacked. Ancient Egyptian texts spanning 3,000 years describe this battle. The pyramid texts carved inside pyramids from the Old Kingdom mention a serpent enemy of Ra. The coffin texts from the Middle Kingdom provide more detail. The Book of the Dead includes spells specifically for protecting against Apep. Temple inscriptions from throughout Egyptian history describe daily rituals ensuring Apep's defeat. Apep was not a demon in the Mesopotamian sense. He was primordial force, chaos that existed before creation, the disorder that preceded order. When Ra sailed through the underworld each night, Apep was there waiting. The Book of the Dead describes him, the rebel Apep with evil in his eyes who lies in wait to devour the crew of the Sunbark, his mouth stretched open, his throat ready to swallow the entire universe. Egyptians believed this literally. Every night, Apep tried to swallow the sun. If he succeeded, morning would never come. The world would be plunged into eternal darkness and chaos. This was not metaphor. It was cosmic battle happening every single night, and the outcome was never guaranteed. The crew of Ra's solar bark, including gods Set and Mayhen and others, fought Apep nightly. They cut him with knives, burned him with fire, bound him in chains. But Apep couldn't be killed because he was chaos itself. You can't kill chaos, only temporarily subdue it. Each night he returned. Each night the battle repeated. And remarkably, Egyptian temples performed daily rituals mirroring this cosmic battle. Priests created wax or clay images of Apep, recited spells listing his names and cursing him, then ritually destroyed the image by cutting it apart, spitting on it, burning it. This happened every single day in major temples across Egypt for nearly 3,000 years. Every single day, priests ritually destroyed Apep to help ensure the sun would rise tomorrow. Because Egyptians believed human ritual and divine cosmic action were interconnected. By destroying Apep on earth, priests helped the gods destroy him in heaven. The realms weren't separate. Human actions had cosmic consequences. The fear Apep embodied was existential in the truest sense. Not fear of personal death, but fear of cosmic dissolution. Fear that order itself was temporary, that the structured world humanity inhabited existed under constant threat from primordial chaos. That sunrise was not guaranteed, but earned through divine effort against eternal opposition. This wasn't irrational in context. Egypt depended entirely on the Nile's annual flood. If the flood failed, famine followed. Egypt's prosperity required cosmic order functioning correctly. The sun rising and the Nile flooding weren't natural laws, but divine maintenance against chaos. Apep represented the ever-present possibility of system failure. Then came knowledge that killed Apep more effectively than any ritual knife. During the Ptolemaic period, starting 305 years before Christ, Greek astronomy reached Egypt. And Greek astronomy, while imperfect, provided mathematical models of solar motion. The sun didn't travel through an underworld fighting a serpent. It moved in predictable mathematical patterns. When educated Egyptians learned to predict sunrise times with mathematical precision, when they understood solar motion as natural law rather than divine struggle, Apep became unnecessary. The sun rose because of orbital mechanics, not because priests destroyed wax serpents. But this transition took centuries. Folk belief in Apep persisted among rural Egyptians long after urban intellectuals dismissed him. Apep amulets and protective inscriptions continued being made into the Roman period, well into the 3rd century of the Christian era. The final death came when Christianity became Egypt's dominant religion. Christian cosmology had no place for Apep. God created the world once and maintained it by divine will. The sun rose because God commanded it, not because gods fought chaos nightly. Apep was reclassified from cosmic threat to pagan fiction. And by the 7th century, when Islamic conquest brought a new religion to Egypt, no one believed in Apep anymore. The creature that had threatened reality itself for 3,000 years was forgotten within 2 or 3 generations of its theological framework collapsing. The Strix, Rome's blood-drinking owl. We move now to Rome, to urban civilization at its peak, and discover that even sophisticated societies maintained belief in night-flying demons that attacked children. The Strix was described as either an owl that drank human blood or a witch who transformed into an owl to attack children at night. The name comes from Latin for owl, but the creature was far more than any bird. The poet Ovid, writing during the reign of Augustus, describes them. There are greedy birds. They have large heads and staring eyes, beaks rapacious, greyish feathers, claws curved with hooks. They fly by night and attack children left unwatched, fouling their bodies which they tear apart. With their beaks, they drink the milk of infants, and their throats are full of blood. But Ovid immediately complicates matters. Whether they're born this way or made so by spells, transformed into birds by incantation, I don't know. This ambiguity, natural creature or supernatural transformation, characterizes much Roman monster belief. even Romans themselves weren't certain. Pliny the Elder, writing as a naturalist attempting to separate fact from superstition, addresses Strix in his Natural History. I consider it disgraceful that such creatures are believed to exist. The witches called striges are said to feed on blood and vitals of infants, but whether such beings truly exist, or whether the belief is merely superstition, remains uncertain to me. What's revealing? Pliny, one of Rome's most skeptical observers, cannot definitively confirm or deny Strix's existence. The belief was too widespread. Even educated Romans remained uncertain. The symptoms attributed to Strix's attack match what we now call SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome. A healthy infant sleeping normally is found dead in the morning with no clear cause. To Roman parents, this suggested nocturnal attack. The baby appeared drained, pale, lifeless. No wounds were visible because the Strix drank blood internally or left marks mistaken for natural discoloration. Protection against Strix followed specific rituals. Ovid describes one. Touch doorposts 3 times with arbutus branches. Sprinkle water on the entrance. Carry entrails of a young pig. Then say, "Night birds, spare the child's vitals." For the small victim, small entrails are offered. Take heart for heart, entrails for entrails. We give this life for a better one. This substitution ritual, offering animal organs to spare the child's organs, echoes earlier Mesopotamian practices against Lamashtu. The pattern of protecting children from night demons through substitution persists across cultures separated by thousands of miles and centuries. Hawthorn branches were hung over cradles. White cloths covered sleeping infants. Lamps burned all night to ward off creatures that shun light. These practices continued in rural Italy for nearly 2,000 years. The Strix didn't disappear quickly or cleanly. Christianity provided alternative framework. Night-flying blood-drinking creatures were reclassified as demons or manifestations of Satan. St. Augustine argued explicitly that Strix were not real creatures, but demonic delusions permitted by God to test faith. This didn't eliminate the fear. Infants still died mysteriously. But it changed the explanation from pagan demons to Christian demonic activity. The transformation aspect of Strix, witches becoming birds, merged with medieval European witch beliefs. By medieval period, Strix had evolved into witches who could fly at night, sometimes as birds, sometimes on broomsticks. The creature became the witch. Medical understanding of infant death advanced slowly over centuries. As late as the 18th century, SIDS remained completely mysterious. But increasing skepticism about supernatural causes combined with natural philosophy's emphasis on material explanations gradually eroded belief in nocturnal demon attacks. The final blow came with 19th century germ theory and 20th century pediatric medicine. When doctors could explain infant deaths through medical causes, when rates of infant death decreased dramatically through improved care, the Strix finally died. The last documented serious belief appears in rural southern Italy in the early 20th century. Anthropologist Ernesto de Martino, studying southern Italian folk beliefs in the 1950s, found elderly informants who remembered their grandparents speaking of striga, the Italian evolution of Strix, as real creatures. By the 1960s, even these memories had faded. Chapter 2. Medieval horrors erased by modernity. The Nachtzehrer, Germany's plague revenant. Medieval Europe knew plague intimately. The Black Death arrived in 1347 and returned in waves for 3 centuries after, each outbreak leaving mountains of corpses and survivors who watched their families die in sequence. Father, then son, then daughter, then mother, one after another in terrible progression. And in German-speaking regions, particularly northern territories and Prussia and Silesia, people knew why. The first to die had become Nachtzehrer, after-chewer, and was devouring the family from beyond the grave. The Nachtzehrer remained conscious in the grave, they believed. It began by consuming its burial clothes, making sounds like a pig feeding. And as it devoured the shroud, family members above ground sickened and died, drained of life force from within the coffin. Finally, when it had consumed everything accessible, the creature would emerge as full revenant to attack the living directly. German chronicles and legal records document these beliefs with bureaucratic precision. When entire families died in quick succession during plague outbreaks, a pattern plague creates through household transmission, medieval Germans saw supernatural cause. The first corpse was feeding on the rest from underground. Physical evidence seemed to confirm this. When suspected Nachtzehrer graves were opened, witnesses found disturbing signs. The body had shifted position. The shroud was damaged or missing. The corpse's mouth appeared to have chewed something. The body seemed less decayed than expected, as if sustained by the life it was stealing. We understand these observations differently now. Bodies naturally shift as decomposition produces gases. Shrouds decay from moisture and insect activity. Skin around the mouth recedes during decomposition, exposing teeth in ways that resemble chewing. Soil conditions affect preservation rates. But medieval observers had no forensic knowledge. They had only what they could see, combined with the undeniable pattern: families dying in sequence. The preventative measures were specific. Before burial, place a coin or stone in the corpse's mouth, physically preventing the chewing motion. Stake the body through the heart. Decapitate before burial. In extreme cases, exhume suspected Nachtzehrer, decapitate the corpse, cremate it, bury the ashes at a crossroads outside town. A legal case from Breslau in 1345, preserved in city archives, describes exactly this procedure, performed on a man whose family had died rapidly after his death. The exhumation found a partially consumed shroud and the mouth open. City authorities ordered decapitation, cremation, and burial at crossroads. The subsequent deaths stopped, probably because the plague cycle had just run its course. But to medieval observers, the ritual had worked. The Catholic Church maintained complicated position on this. Official doctrine denied the dead could return without demonic intervention, but local priests often participated in anti-Nachtzehrer measures. Plague-terrified communities needed practical responses, even if theologically questionable. Then the plagues ended. The Great Plague of London in 1665 was among the last major European outbreaks. Several factors contributed to decline: improved urban sanitation, quarantine practices becoming standard, better nutrition strengthening populations, ecological changes affecting rat and flea populations that transmitted disease. As plague frequency decreased, so did Nachtzehrer reports. The specific pattern of cascading household deaths became rare. Without the observable phenomenon driving belief, the creature lost necessity. Additionally, Enlightenment rationalism brought systematic skepticism. Philosophers and physicians argued that revenant beliefs reflected ignorance. Governmental authorities began prohibiting grave desecration and corpse mutilation, removing the practical responses that had sustained belief. The killing blow came with germ theory. When plague was understood as bacterial infection transmitted through specific vectors, when families dying in sequence was explained by shared exposure to infected fleas, rather than supernatural attack from the first corpse, the Nachtzehrer became obsolete. A village in rural East Prussia conducted the last documented Nachtzehrer exhumation in 1870. An elderly man died, followed quickly by 3 relatives. Village elders, remembering traditions their grandparents taught them, exhumed the body. They found the shroud partially eaten. They decapitated the corpse and reburied it. This was likely the final time the full ritual was performed. By 1900, no one in Germany seriously believed. The creature that had explained plague's household patterns for 4 centuries vanished within a generation once its ecological basis disappeared and its explanatory framework collapsed. The Dullahan, Ireland's headless herald. Ireland's creature took different form entirely, not attacking, but announcing. The Dullahan was death's messenger, and where he stopped, someone died. Picture this, a headless rider on a black horse, or driving a coach made from human bones, and he carries his own severed head under his arm. The head's eyes rove constantly in all directions. The mouth twists in a smile that stretches ear to ear. The flesh has the colour and texture of mouldy cheese. This is the Dullahan, and when he stops at your door, your time has come. Irish folklore collections from the 18th and 19th centuries preserve accounts passed down through generations. The creature likely dates to early medieval Ireland, though oral tradition makes precise origins impossible. When someone was fated to die, the Dullahan appeared, either to that person or their family. If he stops at a house, he calls out a name. Upon hearing your name called by the Dullahan, you know death approaches within hours or days. Sometimes he throws a basin of blood on the person, marking them for death. But he doesn't kill. That's crucial. The Dullahan announces death but doesn't cause it. People marked by him die from natural causes, illness, accident, old age. He simply knows death is coming and announces it. The physical details were consistent across accounts. When riding, his headless body sits erect on a massive black horse whose eyes glow. When driving, his coach is constructed from human thigh bones for the frame, skull mounted on front, pulled by 6 black horses. The head he carries glows faintly, providing light to travel by. If the Dullahan appears in morning, the person has time remaining. If he appears in evening or night, death is imminent. If the head appears to be performing some activity, the person will die while doing that activity. Only one thing could protect against him: gold. For reasons embedded in Irish symbolic frameworks, the Dullahan had irrational fear of gold metal. Someone carrying a gold coin or wearing gold jewellery would not be approached. A gold object thrown at him caused instant vanishing. This wasn't arbitrary. Gold in Irish tradition represented sunlight and life. The Dullahan, as creature of death and night, stood naturally opposed to gold's solar life-giving essence. This was systematic magical thinking, where materials possessed spiritual properties that opposed or supported supernatural entities. The belief served psychological functions in medieval and early modern Ireland. First, it explained sudden deaths. When someone healthy yesterday died today, the community could construct retrospective narrative. Someone must have seen their Dullahan. The dogs were barking 3 nights ago. The deceased seemed troubled. That was the warning. Second, it provided framework for death omens. People experiencing dread, seeing black animals, having disturbing dreams could interpret these as Dullahan proximity, warning of approaching death. This made death slightly less random, more comprehensible. Third, the Dullahan enabled communal grief processing. When someone died, the community created story. The Dullahan came 3 nights before. That's why the livestock were agitated. That's why the person seemed distracted. This retrospective storytelling helped process loss. Several forces converged to kill the Dullahan. Catholic Counter-Reformation intensified, with the Church officially rejecting fairy folklore as superstition at best, demonic deception at worst. Priests discouraged belief, arguing death came by God's will, not through fairy heralds. The Great Famine of 1845 through 1852 devastated Irish population and culture. Mass death and emigration broke many traditional belief transmission lines. The generation that survived was less likely to maintain pre-famine folklore that had failed to predict or prevent catastrophe. British colonial influence brought English language, Protestant rationalism, modern education. By late 19th century, educated Irish largely dismissed traditional folklore as peasant superstition, even as folklorists rushed to record it before complete erasure. Most decisively, modern medicine's ability to predict death through diagnosis made supernatural heralds unnecessary. When a doctor could examine a patient and say, "You have 3 days," the Dullahan's warning function became obsolete. The last serious belief appears in Irish countryside in early 20th century. Folklorists working in the 1930s and 40s found elderly people who claimed to have seen the Dullahan in youth or whose parents had seen it. By 1950s, even these second-hand accounts ceased. The Dullahan had become literary figure, Halloween decoration, metal band name, but no longer genuine belief. Black Annis, England's cave-dwelling hag. Leicestershire, England. The Dane Hills, a cave clawed from solid rock by iron nails. And inside, Black Annis waited for children who stayed out after dark. She had blue or black skin like a corpse, one eye, long iron claws capable of tearing through wood and stone, sharp teeth. She wore the tanned skins of her victims around her waist, a belt of human leather, and when twilight came, she emerged to hunt. The earliest written record appears in John Throsby's History and Antiquities of Leicester, published 1791, describing what was then already old tradition. In a rocky excavation in the Dane Hills is a cave called Black Annis's Bower. The common people say it was dug from rock by her nails. She was of vast stature, had a blue face, and claws with which she would sally forth to catch children, whom she would devour, wearing their skins around her waist. The cave was real. Multiple 18th century accounts describe visitors examining it, seeing scratches on walls attributed to Annis's claws, finding bones locals insisted were victim remains, though almost certainly they were animal bones from natural cave use. The threat she posed was specific and practical. She hunted at twilight, targeting children who stayed outside after sunset and lambs left in fields overnight. Parents throughout Leicestershire used her as active parenting tool. "Come inside now, or Black Annis will get you," was common evening call. This wasn't abstract warning. Children genuinely feared her. Elderly people interviewed in the 1960s remembered childhood terror, running home as twilight approached, terrified of being caught outside. An annual Easter Monday ritual reinforced the belief. Leicestershire people gathered at Dane Hills, trailing a dead cat along the ground from hills to town, then tearing it apart. This ceremony reenacted Black Annis's hunt, with the cat representing prey. The ritual served multiple functions, symbolically defeating Annis annually, reinforcing community boundaries from wilderness to town, providing sanctioned violence outlet. Evidence suggests Black Annis may have originated from a real person. Annis likely derives from Agnes. Some scholars suggest a historical anchoress or hermit woman who lived in the Dane Hills cave during medieval period. Over generations, memory of this person transformed into monster, a common folkloric pattern where a real individual, possibly mentally ill or simply reclusive, becomes local legend elaborated by fear and imagination. Several forces converged to kill Black Annis. Physical landscape changed. By early 19th century, Leicester's urban expansion reached the Dane Hills. Wilderness became suburbs. The cave itself was destroyed by quarrying in the 1850s. The geography supporting the legend literally vanished. Street lighting arrived. Gas lamps, then electric lights, eliminated the twilight danger zone. Children could play outside after dark because streets were lit. The temporal space Anis inhabited, dangerous twilight, ceased to exist in urban context. Parenting practices shifted. Victorian and Edwardian advice increasingly discouraged frightening children with monster stories, arguing it caused psychological harm. Middle-class parents abandoned Anis as tool, though working-class families maintained the tradition longer. The Easter Monday cat-trailing ceremony was suppressed. By 1840s, Leicester authorities viewed it as cruel, barbaric, inappropriate for modern city. The ritual's abolition removed annual community reinforcement of belief. The last documented serious belief appears in the 1920s. Folklorist Roy Palmer, interviewing elderly Leicestershire residents in the 1960s, found people who remembered being frightened as children in early 20th century. But even they acknowledged stopping belief by adolescents and not passing it to their own children. By 1950s, Black Anis had become local historical curiosity, Halloween costume, pub name. The creature that terrorized Leicestershire children for perhaps 5 centuries vanished within a generation, once conditions supporting her, wilderness proximity, twilight danger, fear-based parenting, disappeared. The Orfhocker, Germany's burden demon. Dark roads between German villages at night. You're walking alone, a mistake, but you had no choice, and suddenly something leaps onto your back. You try to shake it off, but it clings tight, and it grows heavier. With each step, heavier. Your knees buckle, your back screams, heavier still. You stagger forward desperately, because the only escape is reaching the next village, seeing lights, finding people. If you collapse in darkness, you're dead. This was the Orfhocker leap upon. And it was the reason German travelers never walked alone at night if they could possibly avoid it. The creature had no fixed form. Sometimes it appeared as a large dog, sometimes a monstrous pig, sometimes an old woman, sometimes shapeless weight, sometimes it remained completely invisible. This shapelessness made it more terrifying. You never knew what form it would take or whether you were looking at normal animal or demon about to attack. Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm's Deutsche Sagen, published 1816 through 1818, documents numerous encounters. One typical account: a man traveling between villages at night felt something leap onto his back. He tried shaking it off, but it clung tightly. It grew heavier with each step. Soon he could barely walk. He struggled forward, fighting the weight, until reaching the village. At the sight of lights and people, the creature vanished. The man collapsed, ill for 3 days. The pattern was consistent. The Orfhocker targeted solitary travelers on dark rural roads at night. Once attached, it couldn't be shaken off. It grew heavier continuously. The only escape was reaching civilization, lit dwelling, church, populated area, where it would release and vanish. Physical effects were documented. Victims suffered extreme exhaustion lasting days, back and shoulder pain, difficulty breathing, bruising. Some died during attack from exhaustion or later from injuries sustained. The consistency of accounts across centuries and regions is remarkable. From Bavaria to Prussia, the pattern appears. Shapeshifter, leaps on back, grows heavier, releases at light. This suggests either genuine widespread belief or rapid folkloric transmission. Protection was limited and practical. Traveling in groups prevented attack. The Orfhocker only targeted the solitary. Carrying light offered some protection. Continuous prayer, particularly the Lord's Prayer, could weaken its grip. But once attacked, the only certain escape was civilization. The belief served important functions. It strongly discouraged night travel on rural roads, which was genuinely dangerous. Robbery, assault, wild animals, getting lost, exposure, accidents all threatened solitary travelers. The Orfhocker provided supernatural enforcement of practical rule. don't travel alone at night. It also explained extreme exhaustion travelers sometimes experienced. Walking long distances, particularly at night in cold weather while carrying heavy loads, produces overwhelming fatigue, back pain, difficulty breathing, sensation of unbearable weight, exactly the Aufhocker's symptoms. The creature explained real physiological experience. The decline directly tracked transportation improvements. Road improvement in 18th and 19th centuries made travel safer and faster. Better roads meant less exhaustion, fewer accidents. Development of postal systems, stagecoaches, eventually railroads reduced solitary travel. By late 19th century, few people walked alone between villages at night. Rural electrification in early 20th century brought lighting to roads and paths. The darkness the Aufhocker inhabited was eliminated. Street lamps between villages meant travelers were never truly isolated in darkness. Scientific understanding of fatigue, hypothermia, exhaustion provided material explanations for symptoms. Doctors could explain why someone collapsed on a winter road without invoking supernatural causes. German folklorist Leander Petzold, collecting accounts in the 1960s, found elderly people who remembered warnings about the Aufhocker as children and new people who claimed attacks. But even these informants acknowledged they themselves had stopped believing by adulthood. By 1950s, with widespread car ownership, electrified roads, modern transportation, the Aufhocker was obsolete. The creature that haunted German roads for 5 centuries vanished within a generation once its ecological niche disappeared. The Knucklevi, Scotland's skinless horseman. The Orkney Islands, windswept and isolated off Scotland's northern coast. The sea provided life, fish, trade, connection. But the sea also brought something else, something that emerged from the waves when winter came and the mither of the sea lost her strength. The Knucklevi. Imagine a horse and rider fused together, but with no skin. All of it visible. Red raw muscle, yellow veins pulsing with black blood, great white sinews twisting and contracting with every movement, the human part joined to the horse's back, the horse's head running with bloody slime that falls to earth in thick drops, and the breath, poisonous breath that causes crops to wither, animals to sicken, men to fall ill. Walter Trail Dennison, collecting Orcadian oral traditions in the late 19th century, provides the only detailed description, and it's genuinely disturbing. The Knucklevi was a monster of unmixed malignity, never resting from evil. He was spirit in flesh. His skinless body was like a man's, but fingers like talons. His head like a man's, only 10 times larger, mouth projecting like a pig's, enormously wide. Not a hair on the monster, his human part joined to the back of a great horse. But what appeared most terrible, the monster had no skin. The whole surface was raw flesh, red muscle, yellow veins, white sinews twisting and contracting, all open to view. This is body horror, at its most primal. The violation of the body's envelope, the exposure of what should remain hidden, the perversion of natural form. The Knucklevi's actions followed pattern. It caused mortar sheen, murrain in livestock, crop failures, droughts, epidemics. Its poisonous breath killed vegetation, sickened animals. When it emerged from sea and crossed land, it left devastation. But it had constraints. It couldn't cross fresh water. Even a small stream stopped it. It was bound by the mither of the sea, a more powerful spirit who controlled the Knucklevi during summer. Only in winter, when her power waned, could the creature rampage. The most famous encounter describes an Orkney man named Tamas walking home at night along a coastal path. He encountered the Knucklevi emerging from waves. Recognizing it, he ran. The creature pursued. Tamas felt its poisonous breath on his back, heard its horse legs pounding. Just before it caught him, he reached a stream and leapt across. The Nukkalavi stopped at water's edge, unable to cross, bellowing in rage. The account includes specific details: location near water, time at night, symptoms from the breath causing dizziness and nausea, appearance of skinless horse and rider, method of escape. The specificity suggests real experience, though what Tamas actually encountered remains unknown. The belief served important functions. It explained livestock diseases and crop failures that devastated island communities. When epidemics swept through cattle, when drought destroyed harvests, the Nukkalavi provided causation, not random misfortune, but specific demonic attack. It enforced behavioral rules. Don't travel coastal paths at night in winter. Don't approach the sea during storms. Stay near fresh water sources, providing protection. These were practical safety rules given supernatural enforcement. Most interestingly, the Nukkalavi represented the sea's ambivalence. Orkney communities depended on the sea for food, but feared its destructive power. The creature embodied this dual nature, something from the sea, bringing only harm, controlled only by another sea power, defeated only by fresh water from land. Several forces converged to kill the Nukkalavi. Improvements in agriculture and veterinary medicine reduced livestock mortality and crop failures. When cattle diseases could be prevented or treated, when drought effects could be mitigated, the explanatory function disappeared. Scottish education and Presbyterian Christianity reached even remote Orkney by late 19th century. Ministers discouraged belief in local spirits as superstition. Children educated in Scottish schools learned to dismiss traditional beliefs. Economic changes reduced Orkney's isolation. Regular ferry service, telegraph communication, eventually radio connected Orkney to outside world. Island culture that had incubated unique beliefs was diluted by external influence. Most decisively, the community maintaining belief was disrupted by emigration. Economic hardship forced many young Orcadians to leave. Those remaining were exposed to modern ideas, dismissing traditional beliefs. The transmission chain from believer to next generation broke. Folklorist Ernest Mawick, working in Orkney during the 1960s, interviewed elderly people who remembered being frightened by Nukkalavi stories as children. But even they acknowledged never genuinely believing it existed. By the 1970s, even second-hand accounts had ceased. Chapter 3. Early Modern Horrors, Killed by Enlightenment. The ALP, Germany's Nightmare Demon. You wake in darkness, unable to move. Your eyes are open, but your body won't respond. Something presses on your chest, heavy, crushing. You try to scream, but no sound comes. Breathing becomes harder. The pressure increases. And there's something in the room with you. You can feel it. You might even see it. A shadowy figure, an old woman, a demon, an animal. It sits on you, growing heavier, stealing breath, while you lie paralyzed and terrified. This is sleep paralysis. We have a name for it now, a neurological explanation. But for centuries in German-speaking regions, this experience had a different name, the Alp. And it was no disorder. It was a demon attacking you. The Alp also went by Druid or Mare, depending on region. The word nightmare itself derives from this creature, the mare that rides you at night. Medieval German medical texts discuss Alp attacks as medical conditions requiring treatment. The Malleus Maleficarum from 1487 describes Alp-related witchcraft. Lutheran and Catholic demonological treatises analyze the creature theologically. Folklore collections preserve popular beliefs. The Alp appears in medical, religious, and folk contexts, showing thorough integration into German culture. Physician Johann Hartlieb, writing in 1456, provides medical description. The Alp is a spirit that presses upon people as they sleep, crushing breath from them, so they wake in terror, unable to move or cry out. It may appear as old woman, demon, animal, or remain invisible. Some say it's caused by demons, others by witchcraft, others by disturbance of bodily humours. The symptoms match exactly what we call sleep paralysis: waking unable to move, feeling pressure on chest, difficulty breathing, sense of presence in the room, hallucinations of figures, overwhelming fear. These symptoms result from the brain waking while the body remains in REM sleep paralysis. But early modern Germans had no such explanation. The Alp entered through keyholes, under doors, or through the victim's open mouth. Once inside, it sat on the sleeper's chest, growing heavier, crushing breath, producing terrifying dreams. Some traditions held the Alp drank blood or milk. Female Alp sometimes attacked men sexually, merging with succubus traditions. Physical evidence confirmed attacks. Victims woke with chest pain, difficulty breathing, exhaustion, bruising from thrashing during paralysis, and hair tangled in knots called Alpzöpfe, Alp braids, which the creature supposedly created while riding the victim. Protection measures were elaborate. Place iron under the pillow or in the bed. Sleep with scissors open in X shape. Turn shoes to point away from bed. Keep a broom by the door. The Alp must count every straw before entering, and dawn comes before it finishes. Draw crosses on doors and windows. Place a mirror facing bed so the Alp sees its reflection and flees. These weren't superstitions to believers, but practical medical treatment. The Alp had one particularly interesting characteristic. It could be any person or animal under enchantment. Your neighbour might be an Alp without knowing it. A witch might have cursed you to become Alp involuntarily. Some babies born with cauls, amniotic membrane over the face, were believed to be Alp, destined to attack others unless the caul was removed and destroyed. This belief had tragic consequences. Babies born with cauls were sometimes killed or subjected to rituals removing the Alp nature. People accused of being Alp faced persecution, particularly during witch trial era. The belief, like witch belief, enabled violence justified by supernatural threat. The decline tracked enlightenment and development of sleep medicine. Enlightenment philosophers and physicians began systematic skepticism toward demons. Immanuel Kant, in his 1766 essay, Dreams of a Spirit Seer, explicitly argues that supernatural belief reflects ignorance and superstition. Medical understanding of sleep advanced. German physicians in 18th century began describing sleep as natural physiological process, not vulnerable supernatural state. Later physicians described sleep disorders in purely material terms. The crucial breakthrough came in 1876, when American physician Silas Weir Mitchell first medically described sleep paralysis as natural phenomenon. Once sleep paralysis had material explanation, the Alp became unnecessary. Witch trial suppression in 18th century eliminated legal persecution framework that had sustained Alp belief. When courts refused to prosecute witchcraft and authorities ridiculed supernatural accusations, the entire system supporting creatures like the Alp collapsed. German ethnographer Karl Blind, collecting folklore in the 1890s, found elderly people who still placed iron under pillows and performed anti-Alp rituals. But they acknowledged their children dismissed such practices. By 1920, no one in Germany seriously believed the creature that had terrorized sleepers for 6 centuries, that had generated elaborate protective rituals, that had been discussed in medical, religious, and folk texts, vanished within a generation once sleep paralysis received scientific explanation. The fetch, Ireland's death double. You're walking home from the pub. It's late, but the moon is bright enough to see by. And there, standing at the crossroads ahead, is your neighbour Tom. You call out to him. He doesn't respond. You walk closer. He's just standing there, staring. You reach out, and he vanishes, The next morning, you learn that Tom died in his bed at the exact moment you saw him at the crossroads. You didn't see Tom. You saw his fetch, his spectral double, appearing at the moment of death. The fetch was Ireland's doppelganger, and seeing one meant death was coming. If you saw your own fetch, you would die soon. If you saw someone else's fetch, they would die soon. The double appeared identical to the person it represented, but was translucent, silent, often appeared in unlikely locations. Irish folklore collections from the 18th and 19th centuries, particularly W.B. Yeats's work and Lady Gregory's collections, preserve numerous accounts. The pattern was consistent across Ireland, suggesting deep-rooted belief. The timing mattered crucially. If you saw the fetch in morning, the person had long life remaining. But if you saw it in evening or night, death was imminent, hours or days at most. If the fetch appeared to be performing some activity, the person would die while doing that activity. On rare occasions, if the fetch spoke, it warned of danger or gave instructions for after death. The fetch was not a ghost. Ghosts were spirits of the dead who had already died. The fetch appeared while the person still lived, either moments before death or at the exact moment of death. It wasn't the soul leaving the body. It was something else. A death shadow, spiritual echo, manifestation of fate itself. Some accounts describe people seeing their own fetch and knowing immediately they would die soon. More commonly, someone saw another person's fetch and faced an ethical dilemma. Do you warn them? If you tell someone you saw their fetch, you're essentially telling them they're about to die. Some folklore held that warning might prevent death. Others insisted fate was unchangeable and warning only caused needless distress. When someone died unexpectedly, the community constructed retrospective narrative. Someone must have seen their fetch and didn't mention it, or the person saw their own fetch but didn't want to frighten others. This storytelling helped process sudden loss, made inexplicable death slightly more comprehensible. The belief also explained uncanny experiences. Before instant communication, you might see someone in town then learn they were sick in bed miles away at that moment. The fetch explained this unsettling experience. You hadn't seen them, you'd seen their double. The fetch connected to broader European doppelganger traditions. German folklore had the doppelganger itself, the double walker. Scandinavian tradition had the Varduga, the forerunner. English tradition had the wraith. All described spectral doubles signaling death. The Irish fetch was local variation of a widespread pattern. Modern explanations emerged in 19th century. Pareidolia. Pattern recognition creating false faces and figures. Suggestion, expecting to see something causes you to see it. Grief-induced hallucination explained many accounts. Neurological conditions like Charles Bonnet syndrome, which causes visual hallucinations in people with vision loss, explained others. But the fetch persisted because it served functions beyond explanation. It provided warning system for death. It offered community narrative structure around loss. It made death feel less random, more knowable. The collapse came from multiple directions. Improved communication eliminated many fetch sightings. Before telegrams and telephones, genuine uncertainty existed about where people were. But instant communication reduced these uncanny coincidences. Electric lighting changed night visibility. Many fetch sightings occurred in dim light, where shadowy figures were ambiguous. Better lighting made figures clearly identifiable or clearly not human. The ambiguous visual zone where fetch appeared diminished. Medical knowledge about hallucinations reduced need for supernatural explanation. When doctors could explain grief-induced visions as psychological phenomenon, the fetch became unnecessary. The Great Famine disrupted Irish traditional culture. The generation surviving massive death and emigration was less likely to maintain folklore that had failed to predict or prevent catastrophe. Anthropologist William Carlton, working in Galway during the 1930s, found elderly people who still believed in the fetch and claimed to have seen relatives fetch before their deaths. But even these believers acknowledged their children dismissed it. By 1950s, with modern communication, widespread education, psychological explanation for hallucinations, the fetch had vanished. The creature that warned of death for 3 centuries disappeared once conditions creating fetch sightings were eliminated. The boneless, Scandinavia's shapeless horror. Some creatures inspire fear through their forms, fangs, claws, wings. But one of the strangest terrors in European folklore inspired fear through formlessness itself. The boneless had no bones, no structure, no fixed shape. It was merely a mass of flesh that somehow moved with disturbing intelligence. In Scandinavian folklore, particularly Icelandic sagas and Norwegian folk tales, the boneless crept through farms at night. It could flatten itself to slide under doors or through window cracks. When it found livestock sleeping, it would press upon them, smothering them until they died. The animals showed no external marks, but inside, bones broken, organs crushed. Norwegian folklorist Just Matthias Thiele, collecting Danish folk legends in 1819, provides one of the few detailed descriptions. The boneless is a creature without form or shape that nevertheless lives and moves. It appears as a mass of flesh, sometimes grey, sometimes white, like fat or blubber. It can flatten itself to slide through the smallest gaps. When it finds sleeping livestock, it presses upon them, smothering them. Their bodies afterward show no external wounds, but inside everything is crushed. Farmers finding apparently healthy animals dead with no external wounds attributed it to the boneless. We understand this differently now. Bloat, internal hemorrhage, crush injuries from other animals. Certain poisonings all produce this pattern. But Scandinavian farmers had no veterinary forensics. They had only dead animals with mysterious internal damage. The most disturbing accounts describe the boneless attacking humans. Someone sleeping in barn or stable might wake feeling something pressing upon them, something soft and cold, smothering breath. They would struggle but find nothing solid to grasp. The flesh simply gave way and reformed. Only by reaching daylight or fire could they escape, as the creature allegedly feared light and heat. Protection was specific and practical. Seal all cracks and gaps in walls. Keep fire burning through the night. Place iron near vulnerable animals. Hang herbs, particularly juniper, above doors. These measures suggest the boneless was associated with cold. It crept in through gaps where cold air entered, fled from heat and fire. The creature likely originated from several phenomena interpreted through supernatural lens. Cold weather kills livestock, particularly young animals. A calf found frozen to death with no obvious external injury might be attributed to the boneless. Rare neurological conditions cause animals to die with internal injuries, but without external trauma. The sensation of sleep paralysis combined with hypothermia could produce the exact experience: pressure, inability to move, cold, formless presence. The creature may also reflect primal fear of categorical violation. Most monsters have recognizable shapes: animal, human, hybrid. The boneless violated basic categories. It was alive, but shapeless. It was flesh, but without structure. It was mobile, but without bones. This violation of natural categories made it deeply unsettling. The decline tracked improvements in agricultural knowledge and building techniques. Understanding of livestock diseases advanced through 18th and 19th centuries. Veterinary medicine explained mysterious animal deaths through disease, poisoning, environmental factors. Improved building eliminated gaps and cracks. Better constructed barns had sealed walls and proper doors, reducing drafts and cold. The physical spaces the boneless inhabited were eliminated through better architecture. Introduction of more effective heating systems, particularly iron stoves, maintained stable temperatures that reduced cold-related livestock deaths. Most decisively, Enlightenment mechanistic worldview dismissed shapeless creatures as impossible. If the creature had no bones, it couldn't move or maintain any structure. The biology simply didn't work. Educated Scandinavians rejected the boneless as physically impossible, even when they couldn't always explain the livestock deaths attributed to it. Remote Norwegian and Icelandic farms maintained belief into mid-19th century. By 1900, no one seriously believed. The creature that haunted Scandinavian farms for 5 centuries vanished within a generation, once building improvements eliminated mysterious livestock deaths and biological knowledge made a boneless creature implausible. The Drauga, Scandinavia's tomb guardian. The Drauga has been revived recently in video games and popular culture, but the original creature, the genuine Norse revenant from Viking Age Iceland, has been forgotten. What remains is a simplified zombie, stripped of everything that made the authentic Drauga terrifying. The original Drauga was intelligent. It could speak, laying curses that came true. It had supernatural strength and could manipulate its own weight, becoming impossibly heavy or light at will. It glowed in darkness. It could change size, growing enormous or shrinking to enter small spaces, and it was nearly unstoppable. You couldn't kill it by normal means because it was already dead. The Icelandic sagas, written in the 13th century but describing events from Viking Age 4 centuries earlier, provide detailed Drauga encounters with specific names, dates, locations. These weren't vague folklore but specific historical accounts, or at least accounts presented as historical. Gretti's saga describes the hero Grettir's fight with the Drauga Glamour. Glamour had been a shepherd who died after seeing a supernatural creature. After burial, he rose as Drauga and terrorized the region, killing livestock and people. Grettir confronted him at night in an abandoned farmhouse. The saga describes the battle with remarkable detail. Glamour's eyes glowed in darkness. His grip was superhumanly strong. He could increase his weight at will, making himself impossible to move. He spoke, cursing Grettir. They fought destructively, wrecking the farmhouse. Finally, Grettir wrestled Glamour outside, where moonlight fell on the Drauga's face. Glamour spoke a final curse. Then Grettir beheaded him and burned the body. This reveals key characteristics: supernatural strength, weight manipulation, glowing eyes, speech and intelligence, vulnerability to decapitation and burning, cursing power. The Drauga wasn't mindless, it was calculating enemy. Eyrbyggja saga describes Thorolf Twistfoot, perhaps the most famous Drauga. Thorolf was cruel and greedy in life. After death, he rose as Drauga, haunting his farm, killing servants, destroying livestock. Multiple attempts to defeat him failed. Finally, his son Ankel exhumed the body, cut off the head, burned both parts separately, and scattered ashes in different locations. Only then did Thorolf stay dead. The Drauga served specific cultural function. It enforced respect for the dead and their possessions. Grave robbery was serious transgression in Viking culture. The Drauga ensured violators paid with their lives. This provided supernatural enforcement of social rules around death and property. The creature also embodied Norse concepts about personality and death. The Norse believed particularly strong personalities could resist death. Greed and violence created so much spiritual weight that the person couldn't pass to the afterlife. The Drauga was someone whose vices literally prevented them from moving on. Physical characteristics distinguished Drauga from ordinary corpses. They were described as swollen, discolored, emitting foul odor, genuine decomposition observations. but also possessing supernatural strength and the ability to change size. The descriptions mixed accurate observation with supernatural elements. Defeating a Draugr required elaborate procedures: decapitation, burning, driving stake through heart, cutting off the head and placing it at the corpse's buttocks, preventing head from reuniting with body, binding corpse with iron chains, burying at crossroads, transporting far from home and dumping at sea. Multiple sagas describe heroes performing these rituals. Christianity killed the Draugr slowly, but inexorably. Christianity arrived in Scandinavia between 1000 and 1200, bringing theology with no place for intelligent revenants guarding treasure. Christian theology held the dead went to heaven, hell, or purgatory. They didn't remain in burial mounds. Christian burial practices replaced Norse burial. Christians were buried in consecrated churchyards, not isolated mounds with grave goods. The physical context supporting Draugr belief was eliminated. Grave robbery declined as Norse raiding culture ended and societies organized better law enforcement. The actual transgression the Draugr punished became rare. Protestant Reformation brought intensified skepticism towards supernatural entities beyond God, angels, demons. Lutheran and Calvinist theology explicitly rejected the idea of the dead remaining on earth in physical form. The Icelandic sagas preserved Draugr stories, but by the time they were written, authors already treated them as historical accounts from less Christian past, not current threats. The saga authors believed their pagan ancestors encountered Draugr, but they themselves didn't expect to meet one. Remote Icelandic farms maintained belief into the 17th century. Folklorist Jon Arnason, collecting in the 1850s and 60s, found elderly people who remembered stories but acknowledged belief had faded generations earlier. By 1700, no educated Scandinavian believed. The creature persisted in folk tales and later in romanticized Viking revival literature. But as historical curiosity or fictional monster, never again as genuine threat. The spring-heeled Jack, Victorian England's leaping terror. We enter now the modern period, where creatures emerged from and were killed by the same forces: industrial urbanization, mass media, rapid technological change. Spring-heeled Jack is perhaps the first truly modern monster. A mysterious figure terrorized London and other English cities for nearly 70 years. Witnesses described a creature or person who could leap impossible heights, over 9-foot walls, onto rooftops, across wide streets in single bounds. He breathed blue fire. He had clawed hands that tore clothing. His eyes glowed, and he attacked women in dark streets before vanishing with supernatural leaps. We have contemporary documentation. The Times, Illustrated Police News, dozens of local papers covered Jack attacks from 1838 through the 1880s. These aren't folklore collected generations later. These are immediate contemporary reports, news coverage, police investigations, public panic. The first widely publicized attack occurred February 1838. Miss Jane Alsop answered her door at night in Bow, London. A figure in a cloak claimed to be a police officer needing light. When she brought a candle, he threw off the cloak, revealing glowing eyes. He breathed blue fire in her face. He grabbed her dress with clawed hands. She screamed. Her sister came to help. Jack fled with supernatural leaps over a 9-foot wall. Similar attacks followed across London throughout 1838. Multiple independent witnesses described the same characteristics. Tall figure in dark cloak, superhuman jumping ability, leaping over walls and onto rooftops, clawed hands, tearing clothes, breathing fire, glowing eyes. Police investigated, but never caught Spring-heeled Jack. The Lord Mayor of London publicly acknowledged the attacks in January 1838, appealing for information. Vigilante groups formed to patrol streets. Theories proliferated. Jack was a devil. escaped madman, aristocrat playing cruel pranks, advanced human using mechanical assistance, mass hallucination. Attacks continued sporadically for decades. London throughout the 1840s through 70s. Liverpool in the 1840s. Birmingham, Sheffield. Other industrial cities in the 70s and 80s. The last widely reported sighting occurred in Liverpool in 1904. A figure leaping over rooftops, seen by multiple witnesses. What was Spring-Heeled Jack? Modern analysis suggests multiple factors. Some attacks were likely assault disguised by costume and theatrical effects. Burning alcohol or chemicals produces blue fire. Spring-loaded boot attachments enable enhanced jumping. Leather gloves with attached claws create taloned hands. Multiple unrelated attackers might have copied the method, but this doesn't account for the leaping ability. Contemporary witnesses described vertical jumps of 9 to 12 feet, horizontal leaps of 20 to 30 feet. Even with mechanical assistance, these feats exceed human capability. Either witnesses consistently exaggerated distances, understandable given fear and poor nighttime visibility, or something unexplained occurred. Psychological factors contributed. Gaslighting created harsh shadows and ambiguous nighttime visibility. Fear and suggestion made ordinary figures seem supernatural. Victorian women's restrictive clothing limited mobility, making escaping attackers difficult, increasing trauma and possibility of distorted perception during assault. Social context matters. Spring-Heeled Jack emerged in rapidly urbanizing industrial England. Ancient communities and protective structures were dissolving. Women increasingly moved through city streets alone at night, vulnerable to assault. Jack embodied anxieties about urban danger, loss of community protection, male violence. Victorian media amplified the phenomenon. Newspapers competed for readers by sensationalizing Jack attacks. Penny Dreadful magazines published serialized Spring-Heeled Jack stories, blurring fact and fiction. The figure became cultural icon even as actual attacks became rarer. The decline tracked several factors. Electric street lighting arrived in English cities in the 1880s through 1900s. Gaslighting created the shadowy urban landscape where Jack thrived. Electric lights eliminated the shadows. Policing improved dramatically. By 1900, professional police forces with better communication and organization made London far safer than in 1838. Changing fashion eliminated one attack method. Jack tore women's dresses, sometimes stripping victims. Victorian crinolines and complex layers made this possible. Edwardian and later fashions simplified clothing, reducing vulnerability. Most decisively, Jack became joke and literary figure. By the 1890s, music hall comedians mocked Spring-Heeled Jack. Cheap fiction portrayed him as adventurer rather than terror. Cultural perception shifted from genuine threat to humorous legend. Fear cannot sustain when ridicule replaces belief. The last newspaper mention of Jack as possible real threat appears around 1904. After this, references are historical or nostalgic, discussing the old Spring-Heeled Jack scare as past phenomenon. By 1920, no one seriously believed Jack might still be active. The first modern media-amplified monster panic had ended. The creature that leaped through Victorian nightmares vanished when the gaslit urban landscape that created him transformed into an electrified modern city. The Jersey Devil, America's industrial creature. We crossed to America for creatures whose entire life cycle, birth, peak fame, death, occurred within documented modern history, captured in newspapers and photographs and police reports. The Jersey Devil inhabited the pine barrens of southern New Jersey, vast wilderness of pine forest and cedar swamps that remained largely unpenetrated by civilization, even as cities grew around it. And in January 1909, During one extraordinary week, the creature achieved national fame through the most intense monster panic in American history. The origin legend dates to 1735. Mother Leeds of the Pine Barrens, pregnant with her 13th child, cursed it, saying, "Let this one be a devil." The child was born deformed, immediately transforming into a monster that killed the midwife and flew up the chimney, escaping into the Pine Barrens, where it has lived ever since. Sporadic sightings occurred throughout the 19th century. Hunters, travelers, isolated farmers reporting strange creature in the pines. But the Jersey Devil remained regional folklore until January 1909 changed everything. During 1 week, January 16th through 22nd, 1909, hundreds of people across New Jersey and Pennsylvania reported seeing the creature. Newspapers carried daily updates. Towns organized hunting parties. Schools closed. Factories shut down because workers refused to walk to work in darkness. It was mass panic on scale rarely seen in modern America. The Philadelphia Evening Bulletin, January 21st. The entire countryside is aroused over the presence of the beast. Farmers are keeping stock locked in barns. Women refuse to leave homes. Children are kept from school. Men are organizing hunting parties. The creature has been seen by hundreds of reliable witnesses. Descriptions varied but overlapped. Most described a flying creature about 4 feet tall with bat wings spanning several feet, a horse or ram-like head, cloven hooves, and long, thin tail. It left strange footprints in snow, 2-toed marks like hooves but arranged in unusual patterns. It emitted blood-curdling screams mixing horse neighing, human shrieking, and something utterly inhuman. On January 19th through 20th, the devil was seen in Bristol, Pennsylvania, Gloucester, New Jersey, Camden, Trenton, and Philadelphia, all in 12 hours. Trolley car passengers in Camden saw it flying alongside. Police officers in multiple towns fired shots at it. The Smithsonian Institution and Philadelphia Zoo sent representatives to investigate. The most dramatic encounter occurred January 21st. Mr. and Mrs. Nelson Evans of Gloucester saw the devil near their home and provided detailed description. It was about 3.5 feet high, with a head like a collie dog and a face like a horse. It had a long neck, wings about 2 feet long. Its back legs were like those of a crane with horse's hooves. It walked on back legs and held up 2 short front legs with paws on them. It didn't use the front legs while we watched. My wife and I were scared, I tell you. But I managed to open the window and say shoo, and it turned around, barked at me, and flew away. Several factors made 1909 Jersey Devil panic unique in American monster history. First, it occurred in populated industrial areas, not remote wilderness. Second, it lasted a defined period, 1 week with daily escalation, unlike gradual folklore accumulation. Third, it received serious official response. Police investigations, museum involvement, government inquiry. Fourth, it ended abruptly with no resolution. After January 22nd, sightings dropped dramatically and never reached 1909 intensity again. What was the Jersey Devil? Modern analysis suggests multiple factors contributed. Misidentified animals form one explanation. Great blue herons and sandhill cranes match several description elements. Large wings, long legs, loud cries, horse-like heads. These birds occasionally appear in winter outside normal range. Hoax explains some incidents. Several confirmed hoaxes occurred during the panic, including a vaudeville performer who admitted painting green stripes on a kangaroo and displaying it as captured Jersey Devil. But hoaxes explain some incidents, not hundreds of independent reports. Mass hysteria played a role. Once newspapers sensationalized initial sightings, suggestion influenced subsequent reports. People expecting to see a monster interpreted ambiguous nighttime sightings as Jersey Devil. Atmospheric conditions contributed. January 1909 had unusual weather. Warm days, cold nights, frequent fog. These conditions affect visibility and sound transmission, potentially distorting normal observations. But none fully satisfies given the consistency of independent reports, physical evidence, including tracks and damages, involvement of trained observers, including police and naturalists. Something happened beyond simple hysteria. After 1909, sightings became rare and were treated as curiosities rather than threats. The Pine Barrens themselves changed. Industrial development, improved roads, urban expansion reduced true wilderness. The physical habitat where the devil allegedly lived shrank dramatically. Aviation became common. By the 1930s, people were familiar with flying objects. The night sky was no longer mysterious. A bat-winged creature flying overhead lost supernatural terror when airplanes were routine. Media sophistication increased. After 1909, newspapers treated Jersey Devil reports with skepticism. The sensationalist coverage that fueled panic was replaced by amused human interest angles. Cultural attitude shifted from terrifying unknown creature to amusing local legend. Nature documentaries and ecology education made people familiar with actual animals. The devil's description, while strange, could be analyzed and compared to known species, reducing mystery through knowledge. The last significant sighting wave occurred in 1951. Multiple people in Gibbstown, New Jersey reported a flying creature over several nights. Local police investigated, found nothing. Media covered it as nostalgia piece, not genuine threat. After 1951, the Jersey Devil became tourist attraction, local color, sports team mascot. No longer serious belief. The creature that had caused mass panic just 40 years earlier was now joke, legend, marketing tool. The Ozark Howler, America's vanishing cryptid. The Ozark Mountains, Missouri, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Kansas, remained frontier longer than most of America. Deep forests, isolated communities, genuine wilderness persisting into the 20th century. And in those forests, something howled at night. The Ozark. Howler was described as cat-like creature, large as a bear, black-furred, with glowing red eyes, horns, and a bone-chilling howl that gave it its name. It prowled deep forests at night and attacked lone travelers. Our documentation is sparse compared to other creatures discussed here, reflecting the howler's genuinely folkloric nature. Oral tradition passed through generations of Ozark mountain people with minimal written records until folklorists began collecting in early 20th century. Vance Randolph, premier Ozark folklorist, collected howler accounts in the 1930s and 40s. His informants, elderly people remembering childhood and stories from their parents' generation, described the howler as genuine threat in the 19th century. One account recorded by Randolph in 1937. My granddaddy told me that when he was young back in the 1870s, the howler would come around at night. You'd hear it calling from the ridges, a sound like nothing natural. Part panther scream, part wolf howl, part something that don't belong in this world. Livestock would go crazy, dogs would hide. People stayed inside after dark. He said he saw it once, bigger than any cat had a right to be, with eyes glowing red in the firelight. It looked at him and howled, then faded back into the forest. The howler's description varied across accounts, but core elements remained consistent. Large cat-like body, much bigger than mountain lion, dark or black fur, glowing red eyes in every report, sometimes horns or antlers, and the distinctive howl, not quite panther, not quite wolf, not quite human, but mixing all three with something unnatural. The howl was crucial. Multiple sources describe it as uniquely terrifying. It could be heard miles away, echoing through the hollers, impossible to locate precisely. The sound itself was the creature's defining characteristic. Behavior pattern was consistent. It appeared at night, rarely during day. It avoided human settlements but approached isolated cabins. It screamed from ridges, announcing presence but rarely showing itself clearly. When seen, it watched observers before vanishing. Reports of direct attacks on humans were rare, but livestock deaths were attributed to it. What was the Ozark howler? Several natural explanations seem plausible. Mountain lions form one explanation. These big cats once ranged across the Ozarks. Their screams can sound eerily human. In darkness, a mountain lion on a ridge with firelight reflecting in its eyes could appear much larger and more monstrous. Mountain lions were nearly extinct in the Ozarks by early 20th century, matching the howler's disappearance. Black bears provide another explanation. Large bears, particularly standing on hind legs, match the howler's size description. Bears produce various vocalizations. An aggressive bear in darkness could create the howler experience. Folkloric elaboration suggests the howler began with actual mountain lion or bear encounters, then accumulated supernatural elements through retelling. Horns, glowing eyes, impossible size might be additions transforming natural animal into monster. But the cultural function goes beyond misidentification. The howler embodied the Ozark wilderness itself, vast, dark, dangerous, mysterious. It represented everything unknown and threatening beyond small circles of light around cabins and settlements. The belief served practical functions. It discouraged children from wandering into dangerous forest at night. It explained livestock deaths and disappearances. It provided common enemy that unified communities through shared fear. It maintained respect for wilderness that could kill the careless or unprepared. The decline tracked Ozark's ecological and cultural transformation. Deforestation dramatically reduced wilderness in late 19th and early 20th centuries. Logging companies cleared vast forest areas. What had been unbroken forest became patchwork of logged areas, farms, small towns. The deep wilderness where the howler lived was literally eliminated. Mountain lions and wolves were hunted to near extinction in the Ozarks by 1900. If the howler was based on these animals, killing off the population eliminated the basis for legend. Improved roads and vehicles reduced isolation. In 19th century, Ozark families might live miles from nearest neighbor with no road access. By the 1930s, roads connected communities. The profound isolation that made the howler plausible was gone. Rural electrification in the 1930s and 40s brought lights to remote areas. The absolute darkness that made nighttime forest terrifying was reduced. Electric lights around farms eliminated the darkness, where glowing eyes appeared. Economic changes depopulated remote Ozarks. Young people left for cities. The generation that believed in the howler either died or moved away. The cultural transmission chain broke. Vance Randolph, collecting in the 1940s, already noted belief was fading. His elderly informants remembered believing as children, but acknowledged that by the 40s, even remote Ozark communities dismissed it. The last documented serious belief appears in remote Arkansas and Missouri counties in the 1950s. By 1970, even the most isolated Ozark communities had modern amenities, road access, television. The world that created the howler no longer existed. The hide-behind, North American logging camp creature. We conclude with one of the strangest creatures from American folklore, one that barely survived long enough to be documented. The hide-behind existed in logging camps, the rough frontier operations in Great Lakes region and Pacific Northwest, where men lived in isolation, worked in dangerous conditions, and sometimes disappeared. The hide-behind was a creature that hid behind trees, always staying out of direct sight. When you turned to look, it moved, staying hidden. You might catch glimpses from corner of eye, hear branches breaking, feel watched, but you could never see it clearly. When it attacked from behind. The victim disappeared. The crucial characteristic, you could never see the hide behind directly. It was always behind something, tree, stump, rock. When you turned to look, it moved, maintaining position behind you. This created the paranoid sensation of being stalked by something that stayed perpetually out of view. Wisconsin folklorist Charles E. Brown collected hide-behind accounts in the 1930s. Lumber historian Stuart Holbrook documented it in his 1938 book Holy Old Mackinaw. These collections preserve what was already fading tradition. Holbrook writes, "The hide-behind was greatly feared in early logging camps. It was believed responsible for the disappearance of many loggers who went into woods alone and were never seen again. The creature was supposed to be extremely thin, allowing it to hide behind trees. It made no sound and left no tracks. The only evidence of its existence was the men who vanished." The hide-behind had clear practical function. Logging was dangerous. Men did die, crushed by trees, caught in log jams, lost in forest, frozen in winter. Disappearances occurred regularly. The hide-behind explained these tragedies and enforced crucial safety rule: never work alone. The creature also embodied psychological experience of being alone in vast northern forests. Anyone who has been alone in deep woods knows the feeling of being watched, seeing movement in peripheral vision, every sound seeming like potential threat. The hide-behind gave form to this anxiety. Some accounts suggest the creature had variant names and forms. It was sometimes called the tree queaser for how it compressed itself behind narrow trunks. It might be related to the gumbaroo and other creatures from northwest logging folklore, though these had distinct characteristics. The hide-behind was possibly unique in American folklore for its defining trait of invisibility through positioning. Other invisible creatures existed, but the hide-behind specific mechanism, always staying behind something, moving when you moved, was novel. The decline tracked transformation of American logging from frontier camps to industrialized operations. Early logging involved small crews moving through wilderness, living in primitive camps, working with axes and hand tools in isolated conditions. By the 1950s, mechanization, trucks, roads, daily commute from towns replaced frontier camps. The isolation that made the hide-behind plausible was eliminated. Safety standards improved. Professional logging companies implemented official policy, including never working alone. The practical rule the hide-behind enforced became company regulation, eliminating need for supernatural enforcement. Rough logging camp culture that created creatures like the hide-behind was replaced by more domesticated forestry industry culture. Early loggers were frontiersmen living in all-male camps for months, developing elaborate oral tradition. Modern loggers were working men driving to jobs, going home to families each night. No camp culture to sustain folklore. Radio and later television brought external entertainment to remote areas. The oral storytelling tradition that sustained creatures like the hide-behind was replaced by mass media. New stories came from outside, not from local experience and imagination. Remote Great Lakes and Pacific Northwest logging areas maintained belief into the 1940s. By the 50s, when folklorists interviewed retired loggers, the hide-behind had already become nostalgic memory of old days, not current belief. By 1960, the creature was gone. The forest monster defined by what you couldn't see had vanished into the same invisibility that defined it. Chapter 5. The Psychology of Forgetting: Why Monsters Die. We have journeyed through 20 forgotten creatures spanning 4,000 years and 4 continents. Mesopotamian demons, medieval revenants, early modern shapeshifters, industrial age cryptids, All terrified their believers. All were genuinely believed to exist. All vanished. Now we examine not the creatures themselves, but the mechanisms that killed them. Why do monsters die? What patterns emerge across these extinctions? And what does monster death reveal about cultural change, knowledge evolution, human psychology? The answer reveals fundamental truths about how humans construct, maintain, and abandon beliefs. Pattern 1. Monsters die when their explanatory function disappears. Every creature we examined explained something. The Gideon explained mysterious illnesses. The Lamashtu explained infant mortality. The Akakazu explained epidemic disease. The Nachtsera explained plague's pattern of family deaths. The Alp explained sleep paralysis. The Fetch explained uncanny coincidences. The Jersey Devil explained strange sounds and sightings. These weren't arbitrary beliefs. They were theories about disease causation, death patterns, nighttime dangers, unexplained experiences. The theories were wrong by modern standards, but they were systematic attempts to explain observable phenomena. When better explanations emerged, germ theory, forensic decomposition, sleep medicine, ornithology, psychology, the old explanations became unnecessary. Not immediately wrong, but unnecessary. And unnecessary beliefs fade faster than wrong beliefs. You can maintain a wrong belief if it serves a purpose. You cannot maintain an unnecessary belief for long. The pattern repeats. The Gideon persisted until monotheistic theology provided alternative death framework. The Lamashtu persisted until infant mortality decreased through medicine. The Nachtsera persisted until plague cycles ended. The Alp persisted until sleep paralysis received medical explanation. Monsters aren't killed by disproving them, they're killed by making them irrelevant. Pattern 2. Monsters die when their physical habitat disappears. Many creatures required specific environments. The Apep required nightly journey through underworld. Black Anis required wilderness edge near civilization. The Orfhocker required dark rural roads between villages. The Nukkalavi required sealand boundary. The Ozark Howler required deep forest. The Hide Behind required isolated logging operations. When these physical spaces changed, creatures inhabiting them vanished. Urban expansion eliminated wilderness edges. Road improvement and lighting eliminated dark paths. Coastal development changed sealand boundaries. Deforestation eliminated deep forest. Industrial logging eliminated isolated camps. You cannot maintain belief in a creature tied to physical space once that space no longer exists. Black Anis cannot haunt the Dane Hills cave when the cave has been quarried away. The Hide Behind cannot lurk in wilderness logging camps that no longer exist. This reveals important truth. Folklore is not merely cultural, but ecological. Creatures exist in specific environmental niches. Destroying the niche kills the creature regardless of belief. The last generation to believe in the Ozark Howler was the last generation to live in isolated Ozark wilderness. When wilderness vanished, so did the Howler. Pattern 3. Monsters die when their social function becomes obsolete. Many creatures enforce social rules. The Orfhocker enforced don't travel alone at night. Black Anis enforced children come inside at dark. The Hide Behind enforced never work alone. The Draga enforced respect the dead and their property. These were supernatural enforcement of practical safety rules. When the rules were enforced through other means, police, workplace regulation, parental supervision, law, supernatural enforcement became unnecessary. Modern societies enforce rules through secular institutions. Police prevent crime better than fear of demons. Workplace safety regulations prevent accidents better than warnings about forest monsters. Child protective services monitor welfare better than threats of hags who eat children. As social control mechanisms modernized, monsters became obsolete. The creatures didn't stop being frightening. They stopped being necessary. Pattern 4. Monsters die when media sophistication increases. Media played a complex role in monster death. Initially, mass media spread and amplified monster beliefs. Newspapers reporting spring-heeled Jack attacks made him nationally famous. Coverage of the Jersey Devil panic spread the legend across regions. But media sophistication eventually killed them. Once media learned to investigate claims, once journalists became skeptical, once newspapers compared reports and identified hoaxes, media became anti-monster force. The transition is visible in historical records. Early newspaper reports treated monsters seriously. Later coverage became skeptical. Final coverage was nostalgic or mocking. This trajectory appears for spring-heeled Jack, the Jersey Devil, other creatures documented in news media. Additionally, media created competing narratives. Horror fiction, films, television provided monster entertainment that was explicitly fictional. This created clear category distinction between real monsters and fictional monsters. As fictional monsters proliferated, real monsters seemed less plausible. Why believe in the actual Draga when you can enjoy fictional vampires knowing they're not real? Pattern 5. Monsters die when knowledge systems change. The deepest factor in monster death is epistemological. How do we know what we know? How do we distinguish real from unreal? What evidence do we accept? Pre-modern cultures accepted different forms of knowledge. Tradition was a valid knowledge source. If elders said the Naxera existed, that was evidence. If priests described the Lamashtu, that confirmed existence. If hunters saw the Ozark Howler, that proved it was real. Personal experience, traditional knowledge, religious authority, community consensus, all legitimate ways to establish truth. Modern epistemology privileges different knowledge forms: scientific evidence, repeatable experiments, physical specimens, photographs, measurements. Modern standards require different proofs. By modern standards, no creature we discussed has been proven to exist. There are no specimens, no repeatable observations under controlled conditions, no photographs surviving expert analysis. The knowledge that convinced previous generations is insufficient by modern standards. This isn't because modern people are smarter. It's because knowledge standards changed. The same evidence, eyewitness testimony, traditional accounts, unexplained phenomena that established creatures' existence for centuries is now considered insufficient. When knowledge systems change, everything established under the old system becomes questionable. Monsters die not because they were disproven, but because the standards for proving existence changed and they cannot meet new standards. Pattern 6. Monsters die when cultures die. The most fundamental factor. Monsters are culturally embedded, existing within specific worldviews, theological frameworks, cultural narratives. When cultures die, their monsters die with them. The Giddim died when Mesopotamian culture died. When Akkadians ceased being spoken, when cuneiform was forgotten, when the last priests of old gods died, the entire system supporting the Giddim collapsed. No one remained who understood the theology, performed the rituals, transmitted the tradition. The same pattern repeats. The Apep died with ancient Egyptian religion. The Draugr faded with Norse paganism. The Dullahan declined with Irish traditional culture. Each creature was woven into larger cultural system. When the system collapsed, the creature couldn't survive in isolation. This reveals profound truth. You cannot extract monsters from their cultures and expect them to survive. They are not modular beliefs that can be transplanted, but integrated parts of entire worldviews. When the worldview changes fundamentally, the monsters within it cannot adapt. Modern efforts to revive creatures like the Draugr or Jersey Devil invariably transform them. The modern Draugr in games and films is not the Norse Draugr. The cultural context is gone. What remains is hollow shell wearing original form without original meaning. The acceleration of forgetting. Ancient monsters took centuries to fade. The Gidim terrorized Mesopotamia for 3,000 years. The Epep threatened Egypt for similar span. Medieval monsters like the Naxera lasted 4 centuries. Early modern creatures like the Alp persisted for 6 centuries. But modern monsters vanished in decades. The Ozark Howler lasted perhaps a century. The Hide-Behind existed for 70 years. The Jersey Devil's serious belief lasted from 1835 through 1951, just over a century. Why do monsters die faster now? The answer lies in pace of change. When cultures change slowly, beliefs adapt gradually. The Gidim could persist for 3,000 years because Mesopotamian culture changed slowly. Core beliefs about death, ritual, supernatural remained stable for millennia. But modern change is exponentially faster. Rural electrification transformed night landscape in a decade. Automobiles eliminated isolated foot travel in a generation. Radio and television brought external culture into every home within years. When change happens faster than cultural transmission, beliefs cannot adapt. The generation that still believes dies before fully teaching the next generation. Physical environments supporting beliefs disappear before new explanations fully form. Cultural systems collapse before new systems stabilize. Modern monsters, if any emerge, will likely die even faster. Consider Slender Man, appeared online in 2009, reached peak belief around 2014. 5 years. Even this brief cycle may be long for internet age, where beliefs spread and die in months or weeks. What we lose when monsters die. The rationalist answer is simple. We lose nothing valuable. These were false beliefs causing real harm. Their elimination represents progress. We should celebrate monster death as victory of reason over superstition. This answer, while not wrong, is incomplete. Monsters were not merely errors. They were frameworks for understanding aspects of existence that remain terrifying, even after scientific explanation. Sleep paralysis is explained by neuroscience, but the experience remains subjectively terrifying. Understanding REM sleep physiology doesn't eliminate the horror of waking unable to move while sensing threatening presence. The Alp provided framework for processing this terror. Science provides mechanism, but not meaning. Infant death is explained by medical science, but grief remains incomprehensible. Knowing that SIDS results from respiratory failure doesn't make it less devastating when your healthy baby dies mysteriously. The Lamashtu provided framework for processing unbearable loss. Medicine provides cause, but not comfort. Epidemic remains epidemic, even when we understand bacterial transmission. Knowing cholera spreads through contaminated water doesn't make watching your community die less apocalyptic. The Akkazu provided framework for understanding why disease strikes some and spares others. Epidemiology provides mechanism, but not justice. What monsters provided, and what we lost when they died, was not factual explanation, but existential framework. They gave structure to terror. They provided agency to explain seemingly random tragedy. They offered narrative for processing experiences that defy rational comprehension. Consider what happens when a child dies of SIDS. Modern parents receive medical explanation. The infant's respiratory system failed. But this answers only mechanism, not meaning. Why this baby? Why now? Why us? What did we do wrong? How do we live with this? Ancient Mesopotamian parents losing an infant had different but equally valid questions answered by the Lamashtu. The demon attacked because proper protective rituals weren't performed. Because the demon was particularly strong that night. Because the gods allowed it as test. This provided specific causation, potential prevention for future children, framework for processing guilt and grief. Neither explanation brings the child back. Neither eliminates pain. But the monster explanation provided psychological tools the medical explanation does not. Specific cause, preventable risk factors, ritual actions to regain control, community support through shared belief. When we eliminated the lamashtu, we gained accurate understanding of infant mortality causes and eventually ability to prevent many cases. This is genuine progress, but we lost the psychological framework that helped parents survive unbearable loss. And we have not fully replaced what was lost. Modern grief counseling, support groups, therapeutic interventions attempt to provide similar functions, making sense of senseless tragedy, regaining sense of control, processing guilt and fear. But these are new, incomplete, not yet refined through centuries of use like monster-based frameworks were. This pattern repeats. The Guidem helped process grief and manage obligations to dead. The APEP helped understand cosmic precarity and participate in maintaining order. The Dullahan helped prepare for death and create community narratives around loss. The Nachtsera helped explain epidemic patterns and justify public health measures. Each creature served sophisticated psychological and social functions that took centuries to develop. Each was eliminated rapidly once conditions changed. But underlying human needs those creatures served did not disappear. We still need to process grief, manage death anxiety, make sense of tragedy, maintain community cohesion. We have not fully replaced the functions monsters served. Modern equivalents exist, but are often less developed, less community integrated, less psychologically effective than systems they replaced. Consider community cohesion. Shared belief in local monsters created strong community bonds. Everyone in the village knew about Black Anis. Everyone took precautions. Everyone participated in rituals. Everyone had stories. This created shared identity and mutual responsibility. Modern communities in same geographic areas have less cohesion despite better communication technology. Shared belief in nothing creates weaker bonds than shared belief in something, even if that something is false. Or consider transmission of practical knowledge. The hide behind taught logging safety through memorable narrative more effectively than written rules. Don't work alone or the hide behind gets you is more memorable and motivating than OSHA regulation requires two-person teams. The false belief served practical purpose better than true regulation. The lesson of monster death. The lesson is not, we are smarter now. The lesson is, knowledge systems change, and what seems certain will be questioned by future generations. Our knowledge system is not the final system. It is current system, soon to be historical system, eventually to be forgotten system. Maintaining memory of dead monsters helps maintain this humility, not about facts, but about frameworks. The Giddim reminds us, beliefs can seem certain for 3,000 years and still be wrong. The Draga reminds us, entire civilizations can build elaborate systems on false foundations. The Jersey Devil reminds us, even modern educated scientific culture can have monster panics. If we forget monsters completely, we risk assuming our current knowledge is final rather than provisional. We risk believing we have escaped all false belief rather than merely some of it. We risk condescension toward past that prevents learning from past. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, forgetting monsters means forgetting the monsters that may still exist. I'm not suggesting the Giddim or Lamashtu exist. They do not. But the impulse that created them exists. Humans still create monsters. We still construct supernatural entities to explain what we cannot otherwise understand. We still use false frameworks that feel true because they serve psychological needs. What are our monsters? What false beliefs do we maintain because they serve purposes accurate beliefs cannot serve? What will future generations find quaint about our certainties? I cannot answer definitively. If I could identify our false beliefs, they would no longer be false beliefs to me. But I can suggest areas of potential monster belief in modern dress. We believe in economic models that predict market behavior despite repeated failure. Perhaps they serve psychological functions like monsters, making random financial catastrophes seem comprehensible and controllable. We believe in political ideologies that promise perfect societies. Despite historical evidence, such promises always fail. Perhaps they serve functions like apocalyptic beliefs, giving meaning to suffering, promising ultimate justice. We believe in productivity systems, therapeutic frameworks, self-improvement programs that claim to solve human problems that may be unsolvable. Perhaps they serve functions like protective rituals, giving sense of control over fundamentally uncontrollable aspects of existence. These are not literal monsters, but they may be functional equivalents, false beliefs serving psychological purposes. Accurate beliefs cannot serve as well. The lesson of monster death is not that we have transcended false belief, but that false beliefs evolve. They change shape. They adapt to knowledge systems. They persist because they serve functions beyond mere explanation. Until we develop frameworks that serve those functions while being empirically accurate, we will continue creating monsters. They will not look like the Giddim or Nakhtsera. They will look like whatever our culture makes plausible. But they will serve the same purposes, making the inexplicable explicable, making the uncontrollable controllable, making the unbearable bearable. Remembering dead monsters helps us recognize living ones, not to eliminate all false belief, which may be impossible, but to understand what functions our beliefs serve and choose consciously, whether those functions justify the beliefs or whether better frameworks can serve those functions more honestly. This is what we lose when folklore dies completely, the mirror showing us ourselves. Ancient monsters seem absurd now, but they were created by humans like us, facing terrors like ours, needing frameworks like we need frameworks. Their monsters are not ours, but the impulse that created their monsters still creates ours. If we forget their monsters, we lose ability to recognize our own. If we remember their monsters, we see ourselves reflected, creatures seeking patterns in chaos, creating meaning from randomness, telling ourselves stories to make existence bearable. Epilogue. What we lose when folklore dies. We have traveled through 4,000 years and 20 forgotten creatures. We have watched humanity's monsters, created to explain the inexplicable and manage the unmanageable, systematically erased by cultural change, knowledge advancement, environmental transformation. The pattern is clear. Monsters die not through dramatic confrontation, but through obsolescence. They fade as their explanatory functions disappear, their habitats vanish, their cultures collapse, their knowledge systems are replaced. But this catalogue of forgotten horrors raises questions more profound than any individual creature. What happens when an entire category of knowledge disappears? What do we lose when we stop believing in monsters? The rationalist answer is simple. We lose nothing valuable. These were false beliefs causing real harm. Their elimination represents progress. We should celebrate monster death as victory of reason over superstition. But this answer, while not wrong, is incomplete. Monsters were not merely errors. They were frameworks for understanding aspects of existence that remain terrifying even after scientific explanation. Sleep paralysis is explained by neuroscience, but the experience remains subjectively terrifying. Understanding REM sleep physiology doesn't eliminate the horror. The ALP provided framework for processing this terror. Science provides mechanism, but not meaning. Infant death is explained by medical science. but grief remains incomprehensible. Knowing medical causes doesn't make losing a child less devastating. The Lamash too provided framework for processing unbearable loss. Medicine provides cause, but not comfort. What monsters provided was not factual explanation, but existential framework. They gave structure to terror. They provided agency to explain seemingly random tragedy. They offered narrative for processing experiences that defy rational comprehension. When we eliminated monsters, we gained accurate understanding and eventually ability to prevent many tragedies. This is genuine progress. But we lost psychological frameworks that helped people survive unbearable experiences, and we have not fully replaced what was lost. Modern grief counseling, support groups, therapeutic interventions attempt similar functions, making sense of senseless tragedy, regaining control, processing emotions. But these are new, incomplete, not yet refined through centuries of use like monster-based frameworks were. The other major loss is historical understanding. When monsters die completely, we lose ability to understand our ancestors' worldview. We can read their texts, but without visceral understanding of what it meant to believe in the Giddim or Lamashtu, we cannot fully grasp their experience. Modern people reading ancient texts about demons often condescend. They were so superstitious. But condescension prevents understanding. Our ancestors were not stupid. They were using the best explanatory frameworks available given their knowledge and experience. Imagine trying to explain quantum physics to someone from the 18th century. Particles exist in multiple states until observed. Time is relative. Causation can work backwards. These statements sound as absurd to 18th century ears as demon belief sounds to modern ears. Yet quantum physics is true and demons are false. The parallel illustrates that what seems obvious to one knowledge system seems absurd to another. Future generations may find our certainties as naive as we find belief in the Nachtzera. Recognizing this should generate humility, not about facts, but about frameworks. Our knowledge system is not the final system, but current system, soon to be historical system, and eventually to be forgotten system. Maintaining memory of dead monsters helps maintain this humility. The Giddim reminds us beliefs can seem certain for 3,000 years and still be wrong. The Droga reminds us entire civilizations can build elaborate systems on false foundations. The Jersey Devil reminds us even modern educated scientific culture can have monster panics. If we forget monsters completely, we risk assuming our current knowledge is final rather than provisional. We risk believing we have escaped all false belief rather than merely some of it. We risk condescension toward past that prevents learning from past. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, forgetting monsters means forgetting the monsters that may still exist. I'm not suggesting the Giddim or Lamashtu exist. They do not. But the impulse that created them exists. Humans still create monsters. We still construct entities to explain what we cannot otherwise understand. We still use false frameworks that feel true because they serve psychological needs. What are our monsters? What false beliefs do we maintain because they serve purposes accurate beliefs cannot serve? We believe in economic models that predict market behavior despite repeated failure. Perhaps they serve psychological functions like monsters, making random financial catastrophe seem comprehensible and controllable. We believe in political ideologies that promise perfect societies. Despite historical evidence, such promises always fail. Perhaps they serve functions like apocalyptic beliefs, giving meaning to suffering, promising ultimate justice. We believe in productivity systems, therapeutic frameworks, self-improvement programs that claim to solve human problems that may be unsolvable. Perhaps they serve functions like protective rituals, giving sense of control over fundamentally uncontrollable aspects of existence. These are not literal monsters, but they may be functional equivalents, false beliefs serving psychological purposes. Accurate beliefs cannot serve as well. The lesson of monster death is not that we have transcended false belief, but that false beliefs evolve. They change shape. They adapt to knowledge systems. They persist because they serve functions beyond mere explanation. Until we develop frameworks that serve those functions while being empirically accurate, we will continue creating monsters. They will not look like the Gidim or Nachtzera. They will look like whatever our culture makes plausible. But they will serve the same purposes, making the inexplicable explicable, making the uncontrollable controllable, making the unbearable bearable. Remembering dead monsters helps us recognize living ones, not to eliminate all false belief, which may be impossible, but to understand what functions our beliefs serve and choose consciously whether those functions justify the beliefs or whether better frameworks can serve those functions more honestly. This is what we lose when folklore dies completely, the mirror showing us ourselves. Ancient monsters seem absurd now, but they were created by humans like us, facing terrors like ours, needing frameworks like we need frameworks. Their monsters are not ours. But the impulse that created their monsters still creates ours. If we forget their monsters, we lose ability to recognize our own. If we remember their monsters, we see ourselves reflected, creatures seeking patterns in chaos, creating meaning from randomness, telling ourselves stories to make existence bearable. The Gidim, the Lamashtu, the Akhazu, the Apep, the Strix, the Nachtzera, the Dullahan, Black Anis, the Offhocker, the Nukkalavi, the Alp, the Fetch, the Boneless, the Draugr, Spring-Heel Jack, the Jersey Devil, the Ozark Howler, the Hide Behind. These creatures are dead, but what made them is alive. We are what made them, and we continue making. Perhaps the final lesson is not to celebrate monster death, but to study it carefully, to understand what was lost alongside what was gained, and to ask ourselves what we believe now that future generations will find as strange as we find belief in demons who eat shrouds in graves. Because someday, someone will catalogue our certainties as forgotten horrors, and they will ask the same question: what did they lose when they stopped believing? Thank you for remembering what humanity forgot.